Hey everybody, Marianne here, and I want to wish you a very happy July 4th. You know, on July 4th weekend, we do tend to get rather mindless, and I think this year it would be a good idea to get mindful more than mindless. We know about the fireworks and the hot dog type of stuff and the partying, but nobody needs to be told that this year is a little bit different. I think that we have really suffered in this country from the fact that too many of us are undereducated about our own history. We have quite a few states in the United States that don't even require anymore that kids at school and public schools learn our history, our government, and our civics. And that's very, very important, because if you don't learn these basics and these fundamentals as children, you don't know as an adult to be horrified when they are under assault. Now, July 4th is called Independence Day because on July 4th in 1776, although there's some confusion what exactly was on July 1st, what exactly was on July 2nd. But the official date of celebration is on July 4th because on that day in 1776, 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. This occurred in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A group of 5 people were the committee that formed the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. The head of that committee and the main writer of the Declaration was Thomas Jefferson. The way it was originally written is not the way it was ultimately signed, because he had things in the original writing that the southern states would not agree to, particularly having to do, of course, with the idea of slavery. So it was a bit of a compromise document. I think it's the New World Library that has this amazing publication where in the book it shows how Jefferson originally wrote the Declaration and then what was ultimately agreed to. And in the history books it talks about how Jefferson was so upset with the southern states striking down things like accusing King George III of a crime against humanity by bringing slaves, allowing slaves to come to the colonies, and how he would get so upset and he'd want to stand up. He was only 33 years old, by the way, at the time. And Benjamin Franklin would try to entertain him. "Thomas, have you heard this one?" and tell him jokes and so forth. But obviously, the Declaration was no silly or funny thing. It took 17 days for the committee to discuss the ideas, and then supposedly Jefferson retired to a boarding house somewhere near Independence Hall, where he mainly took 2 days to write the Declaration. Why is the Declaration of Independence so important? First of all, let's talk about the relationship between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence was written in 1776, the Constitution after the Revolutionary War in 1787. And this has to do with a universal principle that all of us see in our own lives. A nation goes through it just like individuals do. First of all, you have to say no. I'm not going to be that anymore. And then you have to say, yes, I will do this. I will do things this way. And the power of the founding of the United States would not be what it was without both of those documents. One, to declare independence from England, and number 2, to declare how things would be done here. Now, think of the Declaration of Independence as America's mission statement. This is our creed. Now, 56 men signed it, 41 of them were slave owners. So obviously, in a document dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, obviously when you have 41 men sign it who themselves were slave owners, this is not about the full embodiment or actualization of these men or of American society at that point. What they were doing is laying down the ideals, and it would be left to every generation in its own time to quote-unquote form a more perfect union. John Adams, who was he was the second president of the United States, he was one of the committee of 5 that drafted the Declaration. He said that he hoped that every July 4th, every generation of Americans would revisit our first principles. And that's what I want to do with you now. Just like a company goes on retreat and they revisit the mission statement, brings everybody's mind together. That is what has happened. The American mind, we have lost our sense of social agreement. We have lost our psychological and emotional bonding to our first principles. They're written in the Declaration of Independence. They're inscribed on marble walls. We have the Declaration of Independence under glass in museums. But they're not inscribed in our hearts the way they need to be. Nothing could be more important than that you and I do that this July 4th weekend. So let's read from the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. First of all, we all know the famous line, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, i.e. the colonists are going to declare independence from England, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So they're making this declaration. And the preamble, the famous paragraph that I'm about to read to you, at the time was almost like an afterthought, and of course has become one of the most famous paragraphs in the English language. This is our mission statement. These are the principles which form the American creed and which every generation in its time is called upon to both maintain and to perpetuate. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So first of all, I recommend that you read this yourself and perhaps with your friends or family, because let's go over what those first principles are. First of all men are created equal. Second, that God gave all men unalienable rights. Third, that those unalienable rights are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now, 4 and 5 are extremely important. 4 says that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And the last one is that if the government is not doing its job, if the government is not securing those rights, then it is the right of the people. Remember, the government only exists because of the consent of the governed. If the government is not securing our rights to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. That's our creed, that's our mission statement. Martin Luther King, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, would call that document our promissory notes. That's why he said that he wasn't there to ask for new rights, but to cash a check, because these were the rights that were promised to us. Once again, never actualized, actually never fully actualized, and that's the long arc and story of our country. But even at that time, and these men were not stupid, they knew this. Now, jump from 1776 to 1863. 1863, standing on the battlefield at Gettysburg. The Civil War was the first major test of the principles in the Declaration of Independence. The war was based on the issue of slavery. The South did not want to abolish slavery, were ready to secede from the Union in order to keep slavery. Lincoln was prepared to fight them a civil war to make sure that the Union stayed intact. Now, these were the words of Lincoln on the Gettysburg battlefield. 407 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And then he said that they were standing on a great battlefield to determine whether any such nation so conceived can long endure. And then with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, the first big fundamental correction having to do with slavery and the rights of black people was codified in the U.S. Constitution. But the work is still not finished, the struggle is not over, and every generation in its time plays out that original struggle. That dichotomy between the fact that we are based on such aspirational principles and the fact that even some of the signers of the Declaration were themselves slave owners, that embodies the characterological dichotomy of our country. It's a bipolarity. And every generation lives out its struggle, and every generation determines for itself which way it will go. Obviously, if all men are created equal, you can't have slavery. If all men are created equal, you can't have the institutionalized suppression of women. And then, of course, once again, Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, the eradication of segregation, and the Voting Rights Act. All of those are based on that same national creed: all men are created equal. And what we're going through in our time is just the next iteration of the struggle. That's the value of knowing history. It gives you context, it gives you knowledge, and knowledge is power. All men are created equal, given by God inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. And that means, of course, all men, regardless of their sex, men and women, their sexuality. That's why we've had the struggle in terms of marriage equality, why so much of the conversation going on today about trans Americans. This is the core issue in every single struggle that we have in the United States of America. And when you look at the bravery of other generations, the bravery, the courage, the sacrifices that have been made by other generations to ensure in their time, all the way from the Civil War to abolition to civil rights, who ensured in their time that we're not going to give up on this, but the government is not doing its job. The government is not securing the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all Americans. And they have done what we were promised in the Declaration of Independence, that it is our right to do. And that is to alter that government. And I think nothing could be more beneficial than that you and I and millions more spend this weekend in deep reflection, just as John Adams said he hoped we would, revisiting the first principles of the United States, that all men are created equal, that God gave unalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness to all men, that governments are instituted to secure those rights, and that if the government is not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. The Declaration of Independence does not need to be altered, but much about the way our government, how it operates, does need to be altered. And it's our right to do that. And over the next 4 months, culminating in the election in November, I pray that we will. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful July 4th weekend.